Whew. Can't see anything. Right. Wow, I really can't see anything. Okay, I'm going to try to start this thing. Probably should have this up more over the ears. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to hear the ramblings of an old man. Some of you may know that in my youth I was hijacked, sort of. I was taken off the rails of regular time and space. Let's see, if I come in like that, that's not going to work. So, take two. Everyone for tuning in like this to hear the ramblings of an old man. My name is Speedy Justice. Some of you may know that in my youth I was hijacked, sort of. I was taken off the rails of regular time and space and made the guinea pig of an experiment by the most advanced scientist of his time, and a lunatic, way beyond eccentric, by whom I was made to venture around time and space. Sort of a hobo time traveler, I suppose, with little respite from moving on and on. I was born somewhere around 1872 right here in Virginia, in the good old USA, the second son of Mr. Almead Justice and Mrs. Karen Bridgewater Justice. The history of my upbringing is similar in every aspect to that of other rural or backwood country folk of the time. There was nothing in my life that stood out like a sore thumb, apart from my friends and neighbors, until along about 1889. It was early summer. I remember the spring. It was cold. We were all looking forward to a hot summer to thaw everything good. I was on my way to work. At the time I was helping E.M. Forrester's furniture company at refinishing and repairing old chairs and tables, and along my way to work there was a man there dressed in the strangest clothes I'd ever seen. He looked like he was wearing a pool of water and had a smile on his face like he was going to change my life whether I liked it or not. My friends, that's just what he did, let me tell you. He didn't say too much that first time I saw him. He reached out his hand and I felt a jab like when you walk across a yard, high weeds, and then touch a metal fence. There was a little drop of blood on my hand, and I didn't know it, but he had just jabbed me with a needle that had in it the first and only series of machinae tempus ever to be imposed upon the world. Machinae tempus, that's the Latin word for time machines, which is just what those little teeny robots were. Now these little robots that were coursing through my body and my bloodstream were just like little futuristic global positioning systems. But they didn't only find my location in space, but in time as well. So every now and then, the microscopic robots that were in the needle, then in my hand, well, they go someplace and somewhen else. And they take me with it. As long as I can keep on the grids, I can go whenever and wherever I want. See, time is made out of a grid or a framework of crisscrossed bars. It loops over on itself. Space is like this too, but it expands out on itself, doubles itself over and over the further out it goes. You can't see these time and space grids, but once you've been through them time again, You can pretty much direct when you want to be, then where. I must have lived 1,000 lifetimes by now. I've done all the things people say that they would do when they time travel. I've seen all the religious figures. I've been in all the earthquakes, all the shipwrecks, the plane crashes. You lose the sense of macabre after you really witness tragedy. And I've been there at the greatest times of human history, triumphs of freedom and invention. I've seen all the exciting times. After a while, my friends, exhilarating things get very weary. An old Chinese friend of mine once made up a curse to his enemy. The curse was, may you live in exciting times. There's more peace and truth in a small town where things are expected, where judgments are yes and no, even if a gray area would suffice. Give me a small town just like President Mellencamp says. The things that are left of someone's life at the end of the day, they're just memories. Some of the memories are written down. Worst invention of all time, writing. Words are so much more fluid when they linger in the air. They make much more of an impact there. When you put them in a little box like a book or a computer, they tend to become fixed and hard, like they really mean business. People come and go. No one lives forever. But we try to make words live on, which they shouldn't. I think the downfall of the world is words on paper, the more I've seen of it. Now take the time before words on paper. Everyone was getting along just fine. There were fewer people, yeah, but they needed one another. There wasn't all this disrespect like now. One man above another, one's a princess, another's a chambermaid. These positions only came about from fixed words on paper. When shelter was needed, everybody chipped in. When food was needed, acquisition and preparation were a tribal function. Since words were affixed to granite, all that's gone haywire. Lots of folks ask me why I choose to be here in the 21st century as opposed to back before fixed words or somewhere in the future. Well, this is where I'm needed the most. For one reason, I don't like Bill and Ted's music much. The future's out, so I don't like Bill and Ted. But as for the past, they don't need me there. A man or woman will ultimately find out that life is about what you can do for one another, where you can be the most help. If one takes any other path than that, they live their life as a failed thing. That was why Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven than a poor one. The rich and poor had nothing to do with money, but how much one gives away. You get rich by keeping what you get, and you give everything away, you become poor. The trick is, you become greater as you lessen yourself. This world's full of contradiction and opposites. The old-time Buddhists had that down. The Hindus did too. You give it all away as you reach old age, and in turn, you gain the richness of having helped out. Nowadays, whoever has the most toys wins, I guess, but that's why I'm needed here the most. Because this is the worst time in human history, right here. Well, we're on the brink of it anyway. Some of the sweetest memories I have are the histories I've lived. Darn. Take 3. Some of the sweetest memories I have of the histories I've lived are not what you'd expect, probably. Not weddings or times with a partner, not parties or peace from war. The things that stick are after some major disaster when the worst seems like it's over and people put away their differences for a while. Amidst the anarchy, there is a true peace in everyone's heart. Didn't realize my head was cut off up there. Many places I go to perform, there's always a couple of people who believe my story. And they get me after my show, and they ask me questions, very compelling questions. And I'll try to address some of these so I don't have to reiterate. Try that again, take 4. Many places I go to perform, there's always a couple of people who believe my story. They get to me after my show, they ask me questions, very compelling questions. I'll try to address some of those now, here, so I don't have to reiterate. I'm not a master of languages. In fact, I can't learn foreign languages. I just don't have the ear for them. Fortunately, if I'm going to have a time where English hasn't been... Fortunately, if I'm going to a time where English hasn't been invented, I can go into the future to the Stanton Public Library, Stanton, Virginia, and check out a babblefish. Some of you know what a babblefish is, Douglas Adams' book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. For those who don't, it's a little fish. When you place it in your ear, it attaches to your eardrum and sends vibrations into your brain. So you can translate any language into what your brain can understand. You can check them out for 3 weeks at the Stanton Library. But if you're late and you don't return it at the end of 3 weeks, they send someone to retrieve the babblefish, taking your head with them as a late payment. The future is sublime, but messy, folks. Another question I get quite often is why I split so many infinitives, and I do this to tick off the English majors. Still, another question I get too often is that of the mechanics behind time travel. There are people out there from all time periods that just ape about time. They're time fanatics who want to understand everything like they want to be God to control this continuum by understanding all there is to know. Well, we can't understand something that's more complex than our brains allow. We might witness how it works, how some loopholes around the straight lines, we might know that. We might witness how it works, know how some loopholes around this. No how. Where am I coming up with how? There's no how there. We might witness how it works, know some loopholes around the straight lines. But these rabid intellectual types I've learned to steer clear of. There's no peace in their hearts. I don't think there will ever be. Due to constant hassling, however, I've come up with a couple of minutes explanation that might tide over the hardcore fans of time travel. Time is not a river. It's not something you can rip a hole in, as they say. There's a pretty good analogy that's cropped up in the last couple of decades, the analogy of an automobile's GPS, or a global positioning system. Well, it uses 3 or more satellites to track an object in 3 dimensions. The tiny little machinae tempus, or time machines, in my bloodstream, they do the same thing, only inter-time space. Right now, I'd like to give a little lesson on time travel, starting with the guy born before Socrates. Way back then, this guy was named Zeno. He came up with some pretty interesting turtle race ideas. And in his book, I think it's entitled Fun with Arrows, Dichotometrical Approach. He had one, why didn't I know that? There was this guy named Zeno who came up with some pretty interesting turtle race ideas. And in his book, I think it's entitled Fun with Arrows, a Dichotometrical Approach. He had this one idea that was pretty much disproved everything. It's pretty simple to explain, see. If you wanted to do something like maybe turn on a light switch in a room, you'd have to pass through the halfway point between you and the light, across that room, right? In order to get halfway to the point of the light.
Incoming call from Truman Bridges.